Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back to Pensacola Rabbi. I am Rabbi Mendel, the Chabad Rabbi, here in Pensacola, Florida. And tonight I would like to take a little bit of a deep dive into the holiday of Purim, which is about to begin. What is the holiday of Purim? What are we celebrating? And I would like to tell you the story that is behind this happiest day on the Jewish calendar. We go back 2,500 years ago. It's in the land of Persia. And there was a big king called Achashverosh. Achashverosh was such a powerful king. He was the king over 127 countries. He was the king over the entire world. And the Jewish people lived. There was a very big Jewish community in Persia, modern-day Iran. And the Jewish people are there. The temple was destroyed. The first temple has already been destroyed. And they have been exiled to this part of the world. And Achashverosh throws a big party. Why is he throwing a party? Because he has been king for 3 years already. And he wants to celebrate it. But Achashverosh is not your regular type of guy. He throws a 180-day party. He's partying for 6 months straight. And he invites everyone to come and celebrate with him that he is king already for 3 years. And he invites the Jewish people to come to the party as well. Now, the problem is that this party was not kosher. It was not a very Jewish environment, to say the least. It wasn't really the place for a good Jewish person to be. Not only that, Achashverosh, he was a successor of his wife's grandfather, who was the king Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the temple. And he married his granddaughter and became ultimately the new king, and he was celebrating his kingship. And Achashverosh, during this party, had things that his wife's grandfather had stored away, which he had stolen from the temple, vessels that he had stolen from the temple, and so on. And he brought them to this party. So much so that while this king, Achashverosh, was drunk at the party, it says that he put on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, which had been stolen during the time of the destruction of the temple and was in the palace. Unfortunately, there were some Jewish people who decided to go to the party. And they went there and they celebrated, and they were eating non-kosher food, drinking non-kosher wine, and participating in this not very holy environment. Now, during this party, Achashverosh tells his guards, his servicemen, he tells them, hey, listen up, I have a beautiful wife, Vashti, and she is having her own party in her wing of the palace, but I want her to come and show off her beauty to everyone. And he says, tell Vashti to come and show off to everyone. Now, Vashti, she was a very beautiful woman, and she was all excited to come and show herself off. But something really peculiar happened. It says that she suddenly got little pimples all over her entire body. And it says that she even had a little tail starting to grow out of her body. And she was not going to come to this party. So she sends a message to the king, I am not coming to the party. It's not happening. I'm not coming out the way I'm looking like this. And Achashverosh is so drunk. He's like, really? You're not going to come? And he says, have her killed. That's what happens. This guy's a dictator. Do whatever he wants. And she's put to death. Now, after the party is finished, and now he comes back to reality, he realizes, 1 second, I don't have a queen. I don't have a wife. And he's like, okay, what should we do? So they make a beauty contest all across the 127 countries. And they are bringing the most beautiful girls to this beauty contest to see who will be the new queen. And the various guards and the king's henchmen were going around all over finding the most beautiful girls and sending them to Shushan, which was the city in Persia where the king lived. And all of these beautiful women are coming, and the king is seeing who he likes, and he can't find a beautiful wife to replace his killed wife. Her name was Vashti. So there is, now let's take a little bit of a detour in our story to talk about the Jewish community. The Jewish community at that point was being led by a very great sage, a very holy Jew. His name was Mordechai. And Mordechai, from the tribe of Benjamin, he had come during the time when the Jewish people were exiled to Shushan, to Persia. He had come along with them. And he remembered the days of the temple, when the temple was standing. And the temple was destroyed 56 years before then. And he was part of the high court in the temple. And he was a very, very wise and holy sage. And he was the one who was leading the Jewish community at the time in Shushan and in the greater area of Persia. And he had a niece. Her name was Esther. And his niece, Esther, was also a very beautiful young woman. And when the king's guys laid their eyes on her, and they were like, all right, we got to take her. And they take her and bring her to the palace. And she obviously didn't want to go. She was a Jewish girl. She doesn't belong in the palace. She doesn't belong as being a candidate for being the king's wife. But here she is. And ultimately, the king decides that she should become the new queen. And her uncle Mordechai tells her, "Listen, you're now the queen. Keep it a secret, the fact that you're Jewish. It's not going to play well for you if everyone knows that you're Jewish. Keep it quiet, and that's the way it should be." And that's what happens. And life continues, or does it? So, Achashverosh, this king, has one of his advisors, one of his top advisors. His name is Haman. And Haman is probably the first official anti-Semite who exists. And Haman comes along and he tells the king, listen, there is this nation who lives amongst us, and they are very different. They are peculiar people. They are all over the place, and I don't like them. So I'm talking about the Jewish people. And he's like, I'm going to give you 10,000 silver coins if you give me authorization to be able to annihilate the Jewish people. And the king's like, yeah, sure. I don't like them either. Get rid of them. So Haman takes the king's signet ring, which he was given, and he goes along and he lets out a declaration, an executive order by the king, that all the Jewish people will be killed on the 13th of Adar. Now, why does he pick the day of the 13th of Adar? Because he throws lots. He throws like a lottery to figure out which month and what day in the month. And when he comes to the month of Adar, the lot comes out and it says, oh, it should be the month of Adar. And Haman is suddenly very happy. And he's like, oh, the month of Adar, what a great month to annihilate all the Jewish people. It's the same month that Moses died. Now, Haman didn't know that it was also the month that Moses was born, because Moses was born and died on the same day, the 7th of Adar. But here comes along Haman, and he's like, oh, Moses died in this month. What a great month. And he throws out the 13th of Adar, and he was like, that's the day when all the Jewish people will be killed. All across in all of the 127 countries, which the king is in charge of. They're under his territory. Now, Mordechai hears about this. Mordechai was very well connected. And he hears that this Haman has done this terrible thing, convinced the Jews, convinced the king that the Jews should be killed. So he sends a quick, urgent message to Esther. And he tells her, Esther, listen up. You have to interfere to save the Jewish people. This is your nation. And you have to do this, because if not, you're going to end up being killed once they find out that you're Jewish. And, why else has God made you come into this place? Why else are you the king? Are you the queen? If not for this moment. So you got to live up to it. And you have to go to the king and ask him to save the Jewish people. Now, the problem was, and Esther tells this back to Mordechai, and she says, the king has not called me for 30 days. I don't think he even likes me. He doesn't want me in his presence. And if I go unannounced to the king, he's probably going to kill me. So Mordechai is like, but listen, you have no choice. You have to do this. So Esther is like, all right, gather all the Jewish people and have them fast for 3 days. And I'm also going to fast. And repent and ask from God for his mercy to save the Jewish people. And after that, I will go. Now, Mordechai, he did something unbelievable. He gathered 22,000 Jewish children in the city of Shushan. And he sat down with them and he studied Torah with them. That was the first thing that he did. He realized that the power of saving the Jewish people, of course, there's going to be political intervening that he's going to do, and he's going to get Esther to go to the king and so on. But the first thing that he did was to get the Jewish children to study Torah, because he knew that ultimately to arouse God's mercy is going to come through the voices of these young children who have no sins. When they study Torah, it arouses the greatest mercy from God. That's what he does. And then he gets Esther convinces her to go to the king, and everyone fasts for 3 days. And on the third day, Esther goes to the king. When she comes to the king, she tells the king, miraculously, is happy to see her. And he tells her, what can I do for you? I'll give you up to half my kingdom. So she says, I just want to invite you and Haman to a little party. And that's my request. So the king's like, ooh, a party with my queen, with Haman, my chief advisor, definitely. So the king goes to bed happy. Haman goes to bed happy. He's been invited to a party. Now, in the middle of the night, Haman decides, if we're going to do this right, let's do it. And he decides he's going to build a massive gallows, 50 cubits high, where he's going to hang Mordechai. And he is really excited. And he comes into the king's courtyard in the middle of the night to come and build this gallows. At the same time that Haman is building this gallows, the king is having a hard time sleeping. And he's tossing and turning in bed, and he's trying to fall asleep, but he can't. So he goes along and he calls his chronicle readers, and he tells them, maybe read from my chronicles of things that have happened in the past. So they read to the king an interesting story. The story goes as follows. Some time back, there were two of the king's guards. One was called Bigtan, and one was called Seresh. Bigtan and Seresh, these two guards, they had a plot to assassinate the king. And Mordechai warned the king and saved the king's life. Mordechai was sitting outside the king's palace, and he overheard them talking, and he then relayed the message to Esther, and she gave it over to the king in the name of Mordechai. She said that Mordechai passed over this message to tell the king that they are trying to kill him, and Mordechai ultimately saves the king's life. So the king hears this story. He's like, oh, I remember that. Have I ever rewarded Mordechai for this? For saving my life? And they say, no, there is no record of any reward that he was given for this. Now, just at that moment, Haman was outside building this gallows. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and he's banging and making noise. And the king's like, what's going on outside? Who's making all this noise? And they're like, it's Haman. He's like, you know what? Call him in. So they call in Haman in the middle of the night. And the king tells Haman, listen, Haman, I want to ask you, what do you think should be done to a person who the king wishes to honor? Now, obviously, Haman thinks, oh, this is me. The king wants to honor me. Well, he says, maybe the king should give him some of the beautiful gowns that the king wears, and give the king's finest, most beautiful horse, and have him sitting on the horse, and then have someone, and in his mind it's going to be Mordechai, with him sitting on the horse, to go around the city and call out, so shall be done to the man who the king wishes to honor. In Haman's mind, it's a great plan. He's going to get the full honors of being on the king's horse, going in his beautiful kingly robes, with Mordechai the Jew leading him. So the king turns to him and tells him, Haman, you know what, that's a great idea. How about you go and dress Mordechai in my most beautiful robes that you can find, and have him riding on my beautiful horse out in the streets of Shushan, and you should lead him, and you should call out, so shall be done to the man who the king wishes to honor. And Haman is mortified by this. Me? To go? I'm your chief advisor to go and take Mordechai the Jew? King's like, all right, go for it. Go and do it. And Haman is devastated. But he goes along and he does this. And as he is going and takes Mordechai, and Mordechai has been, mourning over the situation of the Jewish people. And he goes along and Mordechai needs a haircut, so he gives him a haircut. And he dresses him and he bathes him and he makes sure that Mordechai is ready to look glamorous on the king's horse. And he takes him out into the streets of Shushan, proclaiming, so shall be done to the man who the king wishes to honor. As he's going by his own house, his daughter, who is on the top of the house, she sees someone on the horse with someone else dragging the horse. And she's like, that must be my father on the horse. And that must be Mordechai schlepping the horse. So she takes all the garbage of their house and she drops it down onto the person dragging the horse. And suddenly, the person who's dragging the horse looks up and to see who threw all of this horrible stuff on him. And Haman's looking up. And his daughter suddenly sees her father looking up at her. So she jumps off the roof and she dies. So now, suddenly, Haman has to go to his party with the queen. And he's dragged by the king's guard, come to the king's and the queen's party, and he comes to this party. He is stinking. His daughter just died. He was just humiliated across town. He's not in a good spot. And during this party, as they're sitting there, the king turns to Esther and is like, Esther, what can I do for you? And Esther says, listen, I have a very big problem. There is a terrible person who wants to kill me and my entire nation. And the king is mortified. You? My queen? Someone wants to kill you? So she's like, yes. This terrible individual sitting right here, Haman, wants to kill me because I am Jewish, and he wants to kill all the Jewish people. And the king is like, Haman, you're trying to kill my queen? I can't deal with this. And the king gets up and he walks outside. And at that moment, Haman is like, oh my God, I'm losing my ground over here. Everything is falling apart. My great plan of killing all the Jews. So he gets up and he starts begging at the feet of Esther. And suddenly the king walks back in. And he sees Haman almost on top of Esther, begging to her. And he's like, And you're trying to touch my queen with me in my palace? Get rid of him. And just then one of the other advisors says, remember Mordechai, the person who you wanted to honor because he saved your life? Do you know that Haman built a gallows because he wanted to kill Mordechai? So the king's like, you know what? Take Haman, hang him on that own gallows that he built. And that's exactly what happens. So now, suddenly, everything the tables have turned. And the Mordechai has been made the chief advisor of the king. And now Esther is openly Jewish. And, everything should be good. But the problem is we still have this executive order of the king, which the king signed. His signet was on it, that all the Jewish people will be killed on the 13th of Adar. So Mordechai and Esther come before the king and they say, please, if you can retract this. But the king says, listen, it's an executive order. I can't take it away. I can't retract this. But he says, you know what I'll do for you? I'll make another executive order that the Jews are allowed to defend themselves. Because up until that point, they weren't. And so that's exactly what happened. And ultimately, on the 13th day of Adar, there was a big war. And ultimately, the Jewish people prevailed. And thank God, they survived. And Haman was killed, and all his sons who were plotting together with him ended up being killed, and the Jewish people were saved. And this is the holiday of Purim. After the 13th day of Adar, this day that the war took place, where this big fight happened, and ultimately everyone knew that the Jews were saved. And here they are, the day afterwards, the 14th of Adar, and the Jewish people celebrated the great miracle that they were saved from complete annihilation, because the king was king over the entire world. There was nowhere to escape. And here they are, survived and flourishing. And it was made into such a special holiday. And here we are 2,500 years later, still every single year celebrating Purim. And it was Mordechai and Esther made this day as one of the most joyous days on the Jewish calendar. And they said that we should read the story of Esther, the story of Purim, where we have the scroll of the Megillah, the scroll of the book of Esther, handwritten by a scribe on parchment. And we read it with all the fanfare, everyone coming together to read it. And whenever we hear the name of Haman being mentioned, we boo him out. And then we give food gifts to one another, where we want to show our kindness. We're here to celebrate. We wanted to celebrate it all together. So we give food gifts to each other. So you take two types of foods to give it to another friend or whoever you want to give it to. And then the third mitzvah of Purim, the third way that we celebrate this holiday is by giving gifts to the poor, by giving money to the poor, giving charity to at least 2 different poor people, that they should also be able to celebrate the holiday. And the last way, the last mitzvah of this holiday, the fourth one, is by having a party. So we read the Megillah, we give food gifts to each other, we give charity, and we have a party. And that is the way that we celebrate Purim. And Mordechai and Esther, they sat down and wrote the entire story of, the whole story of Purim. They wrote it out, and we read it every single year. And it's amazing to relive the miracle that God did for the Jewish people all these years back. But we ask from God that just like God performed the miracles for our forefathers back in the day, for our great-great-great-grandparents, so we should also merit to have miracles from God. And God should save us from all those who have ill feelings and want to hurt our Jewish people. And there is an amazing lesson from this holiday, because ultimately, if any of the Jewish people had denounced themselves of being Jewish, they would have been saved. Haman only wanted to kill Jewish people. And if someone said, oh, I'm not Jewish anymore, well then, they technically would have been saved. But not even one Jewish person at that time even had the thought to denounce their Judaism. And they all stood for that entire time, all the way till Purim, the miracle took place. They stood with self-sacrifice, ready to give their lives up if it meant to stay Jewish. And that is an unbelievable lesson. Sometimes in our lives, we will face circumstances where, unfortunately, today it's not as popular to be Jewish, so to speak. There is unfortunately so much hate to the Jewish people today out there in the world. But we have to realize that God is protecting us and God is looking after us. And in every situation and in every generation, whenever there is someone who wants to come and hurt and annihilate the Jewish people, ultimately God protects them. God protects us. Whether it was Pharaoh in the days of Egypt, he's long gone. Whether it was the days of the Greeks in the story of Hanukkah, they're long gone, but we're here still celebrating. Whether it's the holiday of Purim with Haman, the Persians, they're long gone. The Romans, they're long gone. We are still here. And that is the Jewish perseverance. And we celebrate that. We celebrate the fact that God is continuing to watch out for us in every single generation and in every single time. Whenever there is someone who wants to destroy us, we ultimately win. And we turn it into a holiday. We celebrate Passover, we celebrate Hanukkah, we celebrate Purim, all of these different Jewish holidays, the happiest days of the year, showing the Jewish perseverance, this miracle that we still exist after so many thousands of years and so much persecution. But Purim is a day of joy. It's a day to celebrate. It's to celebrate our relationship with God. And it's called Purim, just like Yom Kippurim. Just like the holiest day of the year is Yom Kippur, which shows on that essential relationship that we have with God. And that's why we get atonement from God, because the essence of our soul is revealed. And we show that in eternal and internal connection that we have with God. Purim is exactly the same thing. On Purim, our essence becomes revealed. That is why we are here to celebrate. But we don't do it by fasting and by sitting in a synagogue praying all day long. We do this by celebrating. We do this with joy. We do it by saying l'chaim and having a drink and coming together to celebrate our Judaism and our relationship with God. So on that note, my dear friends, Purim is coming. Find a local shul or Chabad house near you where you can go and hear the Megillah reading on Purim. And during the day of Purim, we give the food gifts to our friends, we give charity to the poor, and we have a big party. So l'chaim, l'chaim, happy Purim, celebrate, because a miracle has happened and is continuing to happen. L'chaim.